picture. So he's gonna send Miss Shirley a text message, say, go out there and take a picture real quick of my crooked cabin. Send it to me. So good to see everyone this morning. Good to see Miss Jimmy back. So I know we're all enjoying the cold weather. So it does feel pretty good out there. So I was mowing yesterday, and it wasn't quite this chilly yesterday morning, but I was mowing yesterday early in the morning, and you'd come out of the cold underneath the trees, and the sun would be shining real bright in a spot, and that warm sun would hit you, and it felt so good with that warm sun hitting you. So I like this time of year. It's one of my favorite times of year. So. All right, if you have your Bible, turn to Matthew chapter number 27. Matthew chapter number 27. We are going to read a bunch this morning. And the reason we're going to read a bunch is because we have to read a bunch, because each gospel portrays it slightly different. And I don't want to say slightly different, maybe that's the wrong terminology. Each gospel gives you more detail. You know, some of them have less detail. Some of them provide a lot of detail. And so if you only read one passage, then you don't get the full scope. And so I would prefer for us to read all four passages just so that we have the full scope. But we're gonna move on from Jesus, being tried by the Jews, and then last week we ended where Judas brought the money back, and we may look at that for just a second here this morning. But we're now gonna have Jesus before Pilate. And it's funny because I read this story, and I almost have some sympathy for Pilate. Now I know that probably sounds weird, but I almost have some sympathy for him, because he was a man that was stuck between a rock and a hard place, and he chose. I mean, obviously we know that he chose the wrong decision. And I believe that even times when God is going to do something, I believe that he gives people a way out, and he can still perform the thing that he wants done. And so we know that Jesus was going to the cross. We know that Jesus was going to be crucified. But I believe that even God gave Pilate a warning, and God gave Pilate just the sheer common sense. Just the sheer common sense to know that what he was doing was wrong, but yet he made a choice, and it's funny because sometimes you try and get out of something, but you don't. And I'm getting into my Sunday school lesson here before I even read the first verse. But Pilate tried to get out of it, but he just didn't man up and say, we're not doing this. And there are just certain times where you just have to man up and just say, hey, look, all right, everyone, be quiet. This is what we're doing. And Pilate didn't do that. He kept trying to work a way around where it would look like he wasn't working a way around, but all he was doing was just not manning up and just making a decision. And so anyway, so in Matthew chapter number 27, verse number 1, it says, when the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away, delivered him to Pontius Pilate the governor. And so again, whenever he was before the Jews, the Caiaphas says, hey, you know what, need we any further for any witnesses? And then they basically, pronounce him, ready for death. And then they come back. It doesn't happen immediately, but they come back. And so that's what it's saying, when the morning was come. So they come back, and I was reading under one author, and I don't remember which one it was. But basically, there was supposed to be, anytime the Jews pronounced a death sentence on someone, there was supposed to be a time between a certain amount of time between when they pronounced that death sentence, and then they come back, and they basically had almost like another vote, Brother Parks. And anyone who voted no was not allowed to change their vote. So if the vote was yes, death, no, not death, anyone that voted no was not allowed to change their vote. You could not come back later and say, okay, I changed my mind. Yes, we should kill him. But those that had voted yes had the opportunity to come back later and vote no. But if I remember from what I was reading, it was supposed to be like a couple days. It was supposed to be, you were supposed to, because it was a serious thing. I mean, you think about something. You're condemning someone to death. You're condemning someone to death, but as we already know from what we've been studying, they just violated Cody. They just violated rule after rule after rule after rule. I mean, they violated, all their rules to get this done, and they're going to continue to violate them. And so, but they come back and they come back together, and they're still in agreement. Yes, let's take him, and they take him bound, and I believe they said it was about a mile from where Caiaphas lived to where Pontius Pilate lived. They said it was about a mile. And so they took Jesus bound through the streets of Jerusalem and took him to Pontius Pilate. And when you get to verse number 3, this is where we ended off last week. It says, then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself, and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned, in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? See thou to that. And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple, and departed, and went and hanged himself. And the chief priest took the silver pieces and said, it is not lawful for to put them into the treasury, because it is the price of blood. And they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Wherefore the field was called the field of blood unto this day. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel did value, and gave them for the potter's field as the Lord appointed me. And so again, that's where we ended off last week, and we were talking about how even Judas could have been their greatest, the person that they could have used to testify against Christ. But instead, they never called on him to testify against Christ. Obviously, we know that he betrayed him, and he betrayed the place where they could take him in secret, so that they could take him and then try him in secret. We know that Judas betrayed him that way. But here, Judas comes back, and we talked about it last week, how that Judas came back and confessed that he betrayed innocent blood. And when Judas saw that he was condemned, and again, like I said, I mean, maybe Brother Parks, I'll give Brother Parks 10 minutes at the end of Sunday school, and he can explain what Judas was thinking when he betrayed him. But I don't understand, Brother Parks. I don't understand, because, here it is that it says that whenever he saw that he was condemned, he repented. What did he think was going to happen? What did he think was going to happen whenever he betrayed him to those Jews? They'd made it known. They'd made it known on multiple occasions, and Jesus just kind of slipped away from them on multiple occasions. But they wanted to stone him. They wanted to kill him over and over and over again. And so I don't know what Judas was thinking. I don't know what he thought when he betrayed him. But whatever he thought was going to happen didn't happen. And so now he's condemned. And so he brings back those 30 pieces of silver. But the fascinating part to me is their reaction. They didn't want anything to do with that money. They didn't want anything to do with that money. And I thought about, I think it happens in every person's life, especially a young person that grows up in a church. There comes a point in every person's life whenever they have to decide what they're going to do with Jesus. They have to decide what they're going to do with Jesus, and they have to decide: is their religion, is the religion that they have, is that all they want, or do they want Jesus? And so here these people are faced with the reality that they're betraying Jesus. They're betraying Christ. And yet, but they have this religion that they're holding on to. They have this religion that they're holding on to, and I thought about how young people, they're born in a church and they grow up in a church. And I was talking to Brother Keith last night, and he was talking about two boys that had got saved at their family camp. And he said these boys were born in the church. They're born in the church, grew up in the church, but they had a form of religion, but they were just hard. He said they were hard, and they had some things happen in their life, and they had just come to the place where they just rejected God. But yet you can still be religious and reject God. You can be extremely religious and reject God. And so these Jews right here were extremely religious, but yet they were rejecting God. They were rejecting Christ. They were rejecting their Messiah. And so we have here, like I said, we're going to see it again. We're going to see it again in John. But we have here that Judas gives that money to them. They gave that money to Judas. And it's a very high probability that they took money out of the treasury and gave that money to Judas to betray Christ with, and they understood that giving him that money, they called it the price of blood. They knew that wasn't just, hey, you're a spy for us now, and we're going to use you to just betray him. No, they understood when they gave him that money that money was meant so that they could get Jesus, so that they could have Jesus killed. It was the price of blood. And so Judas brings that money back, and now all of a sudden that money's a hot potato and no one wants to touch it. And they're like, oh, we can't touch that. Why? Because they didn't want to defile themselves, because of their religion, and because we're going to see in a minute here, they don't want to go into Pilate's house whenever Jesus is being tried, because they didn't want to defile themselves, because they wanted to eat the Passover. I mean, can you imagine that they're betraying the Son of God? They're betraying Jesus. They are the ones that are driving the bus that's forcing Pilate into having Jesus crucified. And Cody, they said, listen, Pilate, you need to come out here and talk to us. We can't come in right there because we really want to eat the Passover. And so here's another example with this change, these 30 pieces of silver. They're like, well, we can't put it back in the treasury. It's the price of blood. We're going to have to do something with it, but we can't do anything. We can't put it in the treasury. So let's just go buy a field, and we can bury strangers in that field. And so then you get to verse number 10, or verse number 11. And Jesus stood before the governor. And the governor asked him, saying, art thou the King of the Jews? And Jesus said unto him, thou sayest. And when he was accused of the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Then said Pilate unto him, hearest thou not how many things they witnessed against thee? And he answered him to never a word, insomuch that the governor marveled greatly. So again, like I said, when you read these passages, and we're going to get to Mark, Luke, and John, but when you read these passages, in some parts right here, Jesus doesn't say a word. He doesn't answer a word. But whenever you get over to John, Jesus and Pilate have a full-blown conversation in John. But here he's answering not a word. But when he's answering not a word, it's to the accusations that the Jews are accusing him of. The same thing whenever the Jews were accusing him when he was before them. They were accusing him of all kinds of things, and we know that they were false accusations. We know that they were false accusations, and they were accusing them of all sorts of things. And Pilate marvels because Jesus does not defend himself. And Jesus is not defending himself is because Jesus was going to the cross. He was willingly laying down his life. He was going to the cross. He was going to die on the cross. And Chris, he didn't want to defend himself. Again, we've talked about it for weeks before. Had he wanted to defend himself, he easily could have defended himself. He easily could have defended himself. But he chose not to defend himself. And Pilate marveled at that. And Herod is going to see the same thing, that Jesus is not there to defend himself. Again, they were probably used to people saying anything to try and get out of the punishment. Because, you understand, if you've ever been pulled over by the police, if you've ever been pulled over, people they'll say or do just about anything just to get out of a ticket. Miss Jimmy, they'll say about anything just to get out of a ticket. And so here you have a man, Jesus, that is also God, that is about to be condemned to death, and Cody, he's not defending himself. They're throwing out all these accusations, and we'll look at these accusations in a little bit, but they're throwing out all these accusations, and they have to be different accusations than what he was being condemned for the Jews, because Pilate didn't care. Pilate didn't care that he made himself the Son of God. Pilate doesn't care about that. Now, you're going to see whenever they say it scares him whenever he says, whenever they tell him we have a law and he made himself the Son of God, and Pilate, it scares him. But he didn't care. He even tells Jesus, he said, I'm not a Jew. He even tells them, he said, you guys take him and judge him. In John, and they say to him, they say, we can't put someone to death. So right off the very bat, the Jews make it clear to Pilate that their intention from the start is for Jesus to be put to death. From the very start, that was their intention, and so here Pilate understands that Jesus is on trial, not just hey, should we punish him, not just hey, what should we do, should we put him in prison, but no, they were fully intention to put Jesus to death, and Pilate understood that, and he knew that Jesus understood that, and so he marveled at the fact that Jesus refused to defend himself. Pilate, you're going to see that Pilate almost longs for Jesus to defend himself. Brother Parks, he constantly was looking for an out, because he understood that the Jews delivered Jesus up for envy. That's why he was delivered up. And Pilate understood that. And Pilate was looking for an out. And Jesus refused to give him an out. Jesus refused to give him an out. He couldn't understand. Why would Jesus not defend himself? Why would he not just say these accusations are false? I'm not a malefactor. I've not stirred up the people against. That they were accusing him of stirring up the people against Caesar. And again, we'll look at it in a little bit. But Luke 20:20, where they sent those spies, they tried to trap him, and what they tried to trap him on was about paying your taxes, and that's where he said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. And so, but that's an accusation they accused him of. But Jesus, he could have defended himself, but he didn't. In verse 15, now at that feast, the governor was wont to release unto the people a prisoner whom they would. And they had then a notable prisoner called Barabbas. And notable, I'm not sure if notable means he was someone that was famous, or he was famous because of the things that he did, which, he was a robber and he was a murderer. And so, but anyway, therefore, when they were gathered together, Pilate said unto them, whom will ye that I release unto you, Barabbas or Jesus, which is called Christ? Again, like I said, I think here is another time where Pilate was like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this notable prisoner, this guy that's so bad and so wicked and so evil and is so terrible, and I'm going to oppose him. Here's Jesus, that all we've ever heard about is all he's ever done is good. All he's ever done is good. He's never done anything. He's never done anything bad, Chris. Never done anything bad. Never done anything worthy of death. Never done anything but good things. I'm going to take Jesus, and then I'm going to take this guy. And this guy that's caused all kinds of trouble, and he's just a rabble-rouser, and he's robbed people, and he's murdered people, and I'm gonna take that guy, and I'm gonna make it where you can only choose one. And Pilate didn't understand, Brother Parks. I don't think he understood. I don't think he understood that Jesus was going to the cross no matter what. And I don't think he understood the hatred the Jews had for Jesus. I don't think he understood the hatred that the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees had for Jesus. I don't think he understood it. I think, Chris, he thought, oh, I know, this is going to work out. You ever come up with a plan? You're like, oh, I'm going to smooth this right out. This is going to work so good. I'm just going to smooth this right out right here. And you know, I mean, sometimes maybe you have a stubborn child. Maybe you have a stubborn child, and that stubborn child, you know, that they won't do something. They won't do something because you tell them to. Which again, you know, we're not talking about discipline right now. We're just talking about stubborn children. But sometimes if you make them think it was their idea, then they'll do it. And so you get creative. Parents get creative, and they figure out how to trick the child into doing the thing that they want by making them think it was their idea to begin with. And so I think that's what Pilate thought he was doing right here, was he's like, oh, I'm going to make this so simple, I'm going to make this so easy, but I'm going to make it where they cannot, if they're religious men, if these people are the religious people that I think they are, there's no way that they could choose a murderer over Jesus. And I think he thought he had a great plan, Brother Parks. And we're going to see over and over and over again, he comes up with plans. And they backfire over and over and over again. And therefore, when they were gathered together, in verse number 18, for he knew that for envy they had delivered him. And so here again, like I said, Pilate understands almost immediately. Here is Jesus, and he's sitting there, and all he's ever heard was Jesus healed a blind man. Gave a blind man his sight. Jesus healed a leper. Jesus raised the dead to life. Jesus did all these things. And here are the Jews, and they're throwing out all these accusations. And Pilate understands almost immediately that Cody, it wasn't because he did any of these things. It was because they were jealous. They were jealous, just like whenever Lazarus was raised from the dead, and then there were Jews that were converting and following Jesus because of Lazarus, and like, hey, we're going to have to kill Lazarus. We're going to have to kill Lazarus. Why? Because they were upset because people were leaving their religion and following Jesus. And so here Pilate recognizes that this was nothing but envy. But yet they called for Barabbas. In verse 19, when he was set down on the judgment seat, his wife sent unto him, saying, have thou nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. And so history tells us that his wife got saved. History tells us that his wife became a Christian. She became a follower of Christ. But in verse 20, but the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitude that they should ask Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said unto them, whether of the twain will ye I release unto you? They said, Barabbas. Pilate saith unto them, what shall I do then with Jesus, which is called Christ? They all say unto him, let him be crucified. And the governor said, why? Again, here's Pilate. I mean, I don't think just because Jesus, when Jesus didn't answer when they were throwing out accusations, I don't think that's the only time Pilate marveled. I think right here was another time that Pilate marveled. He couldn't wrap his head around it, Chris. He couldn't wrap his head around because he said, why? Why? I mean, again, from what I was reading, they said that Pilate was actually a very rough man, and he was a very arrogant man. But here's a time that Jesus is set before him, and we know that anyone that truly just looked at Jesus was affected after they were around Jesus. And so here's Pilate, and he's looking at Jesus, and he said, "Why? What evil hath he done?" They didn't care. Whenever he asked this question, again, we'll see it later, but whenever they asked this question, Cody, they didn't care. They didn't come up with a reason. They just shouted louder, "Crucify him. Crucify him." They didn't care. They didn't say, "Oh, well, he did this." They already threw out their false accusations, which that's all they've ever thrown out against Jesus was false accusations. But they've already thrown out their false accusations, and Pilate wasn't convinced that he did anything wrong. And now here they choose Barabbas, and I think Pilate probably marveled when they chose Barabbas. But now here again, they're like, "Hey," it almost looks like he was like, "Hey, maybe I'll give them both. I'll give them Barabbas and Jesus." Like I said, again, like I said, he was a ruler. He was a man. He could have manned up and said, "Hey, I'm not doing this." We're going to see in a second he washes his hand, but I'm sorry, you can't deliver him to them and say, "Yeah, go do with him what you want and wash your hands." I'm sorry, you're not innocent. You're not innocent. But yet, again, like I said, here Pilate is marveling. He's like, "Why? What evil hath he done? What has he done? What on earth has he done to justify you wanting to kill him?" But they cried out the more, saying, "Let him be crucified." Verse 24, when Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing. This was basically a mob. This was a mob in one of the other passages. Well, actually, right here it is. But that rather a tumult was made. I mean, it was turning into a mob scene. They had him so stirred up and so stirred up that if he didn't put this down, it was going to spread throughout the city. And because it was Passover, the city was full. It was full of Jews. But that rather a tumult was made. He took water and washed his hands before the multitude. Now, again, like I said, I mean, you got to think about what's going on here. Obviously, the Jews were in subjection to the Romans, and Pilate was governor here, and so they came to Pilate, and they've tried to convince him that Jesus has done something worthy of death, and Pilate's like, nothing. Y'all haven't done anything to convince me that he's done anything worthy of death. You've said nothing. You've proved nothing, and so now I think Chris, in one more attempt, he says, "Let me just do something here," and he brings water and he washes his hands and he wipes his hands off and says, "Look, this is on you. This is on you. This is not on me. This is on you guys. It's not on me." He took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it." He wasn't innocent. He wasn't innocent. Because when you're in charge, when you're the ruler, he didn't have to say that last part. Now, I know that they basically, and again, like I said, I keep saying we're going to look at it because we are, but they almost, I want to call it blackmail. Because they realized that they didn't convince him. They realized he wasn't convinced, and so what do? They say that if you don't do this, you're not a friend of Caesar. And so here's a man that he's a governor, and no doubt he's thinking, hey, I'm just the governor of this area right here, and I'd like to expand my territory. And so if I'm going to expand my territory, he has to stay in good with Caesar, which we understand that most of those guys were somewhat of madmen, and they were very fickle, and just even the slightest inkling of someone saying that they were being betrayed, they would lose their position, possibly lose their life. And so we understand that, again, like I said, you're not seeing it here in Matthew, but they throw that out against Pilate and said, hey, if you do this, you're not a friend of Caesar. And Pilate had to make a decision and say, well, if I don't do this, then these guys are going to stir up such a stink, they're going to stir up such a mess that they are going to send this up to Rome. It is going to make it to Rome, and it is going to make it before Caesar, and then I'm going to lose my position. And he made a choice. He made a choice. He made a choice. And I don't care, you can wash your hands if you want to. You can wash your hands and say, but guess what? When you're in charge, you're in charge. When you're in charge, the buck stops with you. The buck stopped with Pilate. And rather than fight the tumult and say, all right, boys, no, this is wrong. He did everything but say it was wrong. This is wrong. This is evil. What y'all are doing to this man is evil. What y'all are doing is unjust because you are condemning a just man. But in the end, and again, like I said, I believe that that God could have still worked out another way for Jesus to go to the cross and be crucified. And Pilate to have walked away and actually washed his hands. Like his wife said, she said, don't have anything to do. Don't have anything to do with this just man. And Pilate says, he said, this is a just man. In verse number 25, then answered all the people and said, his blood be on us and on our children. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine that they're about to slay the Son of God? They're about to slay God in the flesh, Emmanuel, God with us. They're about to kill him, and the person that they're needing to use because they didn't have the right to perform capital punishment anymore. The person that they're using says, hey, this man is just. This man is innocent. This man has done nothing wrong. And I've given you every opportunity to change your mind, and I'm washing my hands of this situation. I want nothing to do with it. And they said, that's fine. Don't have anything to do with it. Just get the job done, and his blood will be on us. That's bad enough. That's bad enough to say it's on us and on our children. On our children. I mean, again, I know they were stirred up and I know they hated him. But can you imagine Cody calling on a curse from God and saying, God, I want you to curse me. And not only do I want you to curse me, I want you to curse my children. I mean, most parents will go in the exact opposite direction, Chris. They'll be like, well, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to do this because I don't want it to hurt my children. I'm going to keep from doing this because I don't want it to hurt my children. I don't want my children to have to deal with whatever. And so I'm going to, children, I know this sounds weird, but children sometimes keep their parents in check. the statistics are a lot of marriages stay married because they have children. And I know we live in an age where, where divorce is, no contest divorce, $499, and she can be your ex-wife tomorrow. I know we live in that day and age. But still, even now, even today, when divorce is so easy and so simple, even now, that in this day and age, that if you have children, you're a lot less likely to get a divorce than people with no children, because there's no skin in the game. There's no skin in the game if you have no children. But once you have children, you understand. I got a buddy. His parents got divorced. He was probably 16 or 17 when his parents got divorced, and he's going to be pushing 40 now, and you can tell when you talk to him, Cody, he's still not over it. He still doesn't understand, and it put him in a tailspin. It put him in a tailspin through about 3 years of college before he actually kind of started coming out of it, because his parents got a divorce and he just couldn't understand it. He just couldn't get over it. And so they said, his blood be on us and on our children. I mean, I can't imagine bringing, purposefully bringing a curse down on our children. But that's what they chose to do. That's what they chose to do. If you turn over to Mark chapter number 15, like I said, we're just going to go through these because each one has a little something different. Mark probably has the least amount of details and lines up pretty close with what you read in Matthew. But straightway in the morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council, and bound Jesus, carried him away, and delivered him to Pilate. Pilate asked him, Art thou the king of the Jews? And he answering said unto him, Thou sayest it. Another time he says, Are you saying this of yourself? Or did someone tell you? But Jesus never denies that he's the king of the Jews, because if we all understand that Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He was not going to deny that. And again, like I said, they thought they had Jesus in this catch-22 because, here they are. They're under Rome. They're under Caesar, and you can't have someone else stand up and say, "Hey, I'm a king." And so they thought they had him. They thought they had him right here. But in John, Jesus does a great job of explaining, and we'll look at that in a little bit. And the chief priests accused him of many things. But he answered nothing. And again, like I said, here he is accusing. Here they are, just accusing, just throwing stuff out to see what sticks against the wall. Just let us say something that Pilate said, all right, that right there, that's the one that makes him worthy of death. And Pilate answered again and said, Answerest thou nothing? Behold, how many things they witnessed against thee. But Jesus yet answered nothing, so that Pilate marveled. Now at the feast, Now at the feast he released unto them one prisoner whomsoever they desired. And there was one named Barabbas, which lay bound with him, that had made insurrection with him, who had committed murder in the insurrection. And the multitude, crying aloud, began to desire him to do as he had ever done unto them. But Pilate answered and saying, Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? For he knew that the chief priests had delivered him for envy, but the chief priests moved the people that he should rather release Barabbas unto them. Pilate answered and said unto them, What will ye then that I shall do unto him whom ye call the King of the Jews? And they cried out again, Crucify him. Then Pilate said unto them, Why? What evil hath he done? And they cried out the more exceedingly, Crucify him. And so Pilate, willing to content the people, released Barabbas unto them and delivered Jesus, when he had scourged him, to be crucified. All right, now turn to Luke chapter 23. Like I said, that Mark is pretty close to what you read in Matthew, but when you get over to Luke, there's a lot more details right here. Luke chapter number 23, it says, And the whole multitude of them arose and led him unto Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, we found this fellow. We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ the King. So you don't have to turn there, but in Luke 20, verse 20, it says, and they watched him and sent forth spies which should feign themselves just men, that they might take hold of his words, so that they might deliver him unto the power and authority of the governor. This was their plan from the beginning, was to deliver him to the power and authority of the governor. That was their plan from the beginning. And they had their plan of what they were going to accuse him of when they delivered him to the power and authority of the governor. And asked him, saying, Master, we know that thou sayest and teachest rightly, neither acceptest thou the person of any, but teachest the way of God truly. They didn't believe a word of that. They didn't believe a word of that. But they said it to flatter him, to get him to say, oh, these guys are on my side, and they're on my side, and so I can speak freely. You ever been trapped that way where you think someone is your friend? They feign themselves like they are your friend, and all they're trying to do is trap you in your words. That happens more when you grow up in a public school setting, and someone acts like they're your buddy. They act like you're your buddy, and all they're trying to do is just get some goods on you so they can go over to their buddy and get in a little bit better with their buddy and say, hey, guess what this guy said about you? And that's what they're doing right here. Verse 22, is it lawful for us to give tribute unto Caesar or no? Again, they wanted to turn him over to the governor. And so they say, hey, is it lawful? But he perceived their craftiness and said unto them, why tempt ye me? Show me a penny, whose image and superscription hath it? And they answered and said, Caesar's. And he said unto them, render therefore unto Caesar the things which be Caesar's, and unto God the things which be God's. And they could not take hold of his words before the people, and they marveled at his answer and held their peace. But here in Luke 23, verse number 2, it says, forbidding to give tribute to Caesar. It was a lie. It was a straight up lie. And they knew it was a lie because they already tried to trap him and he refused to be trapped. And yet here they are before Pilate, and they said, all right, he didn't accept it, but he didn't fall into the trap, but we're going to accuse him of it anyway because we just hate him that much. We just hate him that much, and here is Jesus, and he's not going to defend himself. Why? Because he's going to willingly lay down his life. And Pilate asked him, saying, art thou the king of the Jews? And he answered him, said, thou sayest it. Then said Pilate to the chief priests and to the people, I find no fault in this man. We're gonna look at it probably next week, but we're gonna look at it over and over and over and over. Pilate says, I don't find any fault with this man. Find no fault with this man. I sent him to Herod. Herod sent him back to me. Herod didn't find any fault with this man. You come up with a new accusation. I talked to him some more. I still don't find a fault with this man. All the way to the point where he says, take him and kill him, but he's a just man. I want y'all to know that y'all are killing a just man, and I'm washing my hands of the fact that y'all are about to kill this just man. Pilate's like, I find no fault in him. I find no fault in him. And guess what? We are 2,000 years later, and you can look as close as you want to Christ. You can look as close as you want to, and you will have to come out and say, just like Pilate, I find no fault in Jesus. I find no fault in him. And they were the more fierce. They didn't care. They didn't care. They didn't care one bit. It didn't bother them one bit that these men could look at Jesus and say, there's not a single fault in him, and it didn't slow them down one bit. They only wanted to see him die. They thought it would be over if they killed him. They thought it'd be over. They said, again, I mean, Jesus accused them of being the ones that killed the prophets. You know, they're like, hey, we killed the prophets, and once we killed them, we didn't have any more trouble out of them. Herod killed John the Baptist, and we hadn't heard anything out of John the Baptist since then. And if we kill Jesus, it'll be the same. We can go back to just enjoying our religion. We can be done with his disciples. They're going to be scared to say anything because Jesus is gone, and everything will go back to being like it was. And we can just enjoy being religious and lost, religious and not knowing God. We can be just whited sepulchres, and we can enjoy the pride and the prestige of being who we are and have people honor us and say, Rabbi, Rabbi, but yet we don't know God at all. And it never shook them up a bit that Pilate said, I find no fault in him. They were like rabid dogs. It just made them that much more fierce. That much more. They just cried out that much more. They just showed that much more anger. That much more they cried out, crucify him, crucify him. We'll stop right there. We'll pick back up next week. Thank you.